What is up, Flick fans, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are ranking all 8 Spider-Man SpiderVerse movies, and the reason I say that is because I am actually including Venom on this list because there's a possibility down the road we can see he and Tom Holland square off. Fingers crossed. But this list in particular is celebrating the fact that we got a brand new Spider-Man movie coming out this weekend, and that is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I was able to see it on Friday. If you don't know my thoughts, you can check them out on my channel, or just wait till we get to it on the list, but I'm very excited to talk about this today because Spider-Man was my favorite hero growing up. Watching the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, regardless of how you feel about that movie, as a young lad, I loved every bit of it. I would pretend to swing around my house like Spider-Man. Spider-Man was my first ever comic book. He really means a lot to me, and it's important to me that we continue to get top-notch, high-quality movies, and in my opinion, we've gotten a few so far. So today I'm going to rank all 8 films on this list. We are starting with number 8. Let's get into that right now. And I want to make sure this is not just a one-man show. Please get in the comments section and share your all's thoughts on this list, and then share your thoughts on your own list. Tell me what's your favorite Spider-Man movie. Put 8 through 1. You don't have to include Venom if you don't want to. I am. But I understand if you want to keep it Spider-Man-centric. And let's start with number 8, and that is The Amazing Spider-Man number 2. Now, this movie used to be a little higher on the list, but rewatching both this and number 7, I have to say that Amazing Spider-Man 2 is just so muddled, and there are so many elements going into it at once that it just does not feel like a complete movie in my opinion. The fact that they went with 3 villains again after the mess that aspect was in Spider-Man 3, I just don't understand why they would want to go through that again. They had a good idea going with Electro, but I thought even he was a little bit too much. Jamie Foxx seemed like he was overacting. A lot of people compared it to the Jim Carrey Riddler in Batman Forever. Watching the movie, I'm like, yeah, I can definitely see elements of that. Now, I like Jamie Foxx, and I like certain elements of this movie. I really loved the emotional impact, the emotional kick that the scene with Gwen Stacy had at the end. I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't seen it, but that worked. It's just the fact that they chose to go down that route and pile that on top of everything else that we were getting with that movie. It was too much, and it made this Spider-Man movie something that should have been a bit more simplified. Alright, next up on this list, we are talking Spider-Man 3. This was a movie, another movie that I grew up with. I watched it in the theaters when I was 12 years old, and when I walked out, I'm like, yeah, that was really cool. And then the older I got, the more I started to think about it. And then I, of course, got into my YouTube channel. I started to really dissect films a bit more and realize what makes them good, what makes them bad. And Spider-Man 3 just had way more elements that made it a bad movie than elements that made it a good movie. Now, the good movie elements are in there when you're talking Sandman, when you're talking the relationship between he and Harry Osborn. I thought that worked, but what they did with Harry's character, the whole amnesia thing, and then what they did with Venom, trying to bring him in and give us a proper Venom when we really didn't get one until years down the road. I didn't hate Topher Grace as Eddie Brock, but once he became Venom, it just felt like it was something shoehorned completely into the movie, and that character did not work in this film, as did numerous other aspects. In the end, is just a giant CGI fight, something that we had seen before and we've seen a lot of since. It just wasn't handled as well. It wasn't as well crafted as the original 2. Sam Raimi, you could still tell his mark was on there, but it was just a very disappointing film. And the more I think about the elements that made me mad, the more I don't want to go back and revisit it. I feel similarly to number 6, and I know a lot of people love this movie. It came out this year, and we're talking about Venom. This was a movie, in my opinion, that belongs in the early 2000s. It's silly, it's cheesy, it's not what I wanted the Venom movie to be. I didn't necessarily need it to be rated R. I just wanted a more intense and I guess a bit darker of a film. When you're talking about a character like Venom, you don't really think of cheesy and silly and jokes that don't necessarily work. Now, Venom does some really cheesy things in the comic books. When we're talking about certain lines in this movie, especially the one when he's not wanting to go down the elevator, those lines had me cracking up And those lines work because that goes with the character, but you also have to have that dark element because Venom is somebody who basically eats people and murders people, and they just didn't really show that in this movie. They made Venom more of a good guy, which is fine for some people. I just didn't like the cheesy elements as much, and I wanted a movie that had tighter direction and a better script. Certain lines in this film really didn't get me going. I will say, though, the best part of this movie is by far Tom Hardy. He is fantastic as Venom, and while I didn't necessarily love this movie, I liked parts. I am excited to see him again. I'm excited for either a sequel or maybe integrating him with other Sony-based Marvel characters. That is something that I can praise this film for. It did get me excited for the future. All right, coming in at number 5 is the first Andrew Garfield-led film, and that is The Amazing Spider-Man. Looking back on The Amazing Spider-Man, I don't feel as strongly as I did when I first watched it. When I first watched it and walked out of the movie, my friend and I both looked at each other. We're like, that is better than the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. Now, it didn't age as well, and that is a complaint that some people will say about the Tobey Maguire movies. They don't hold up as well, but when I look back at The Amazing Spider-Man, for some reason, that film, it just felt really of the time. And not that it came out super early in the 2000s, it came out in 2012, it just doesn't hold up as well. The villain is an explorer, the lizard ends up being kind of lame. What makes this movie work is the relationship between he and Gwen Stacy. Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield, their chemistry in this movie, and even in the second movie, it works there, it really works here. I loved every element of that. And I think Andrew Garfield is a good Peter Parker. That's right, I said it. I think he is a good Spider-Man. If you were going to argue me, honestly, all three of them, well, 4 at this point, but if we're talking live action, if you want to argue Tobey Maguire, sure. If you want to argue Tom Holland, absolutely. If you want to argue Andrew Garfield, I will not fight you because I believe all 3 iterations, we haven't had a bad one so far, and that is awesome that I can absolutely say that. But one thing that I really loved about this movie before I move on to my next one is the web swinging element. I think it's one of the best that we have seen so far. It's actually a stunt that they did on set. It looked really cool when he becomes Spider-Man, integrating a bit of the Uncle Ben story but not focusing on that as much. This movie did some things right, and the director's name is Mark Webb. Spider-Man, that's really good. And maybe if we would have gotten a third movie, I would like this movie even more, but we didn't, so that's why it's number 5 on my list. All right, this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Watching this movie as a young lad, I really loved every element of it. It was a bit cheesy if you go back and watch it now, but the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man just does it right. It is something that I believe changed the landscape of superhero films. Now, you can argue that a lot of the films in the early 2000s did that, but the original Spider-Man just does a lot of things that we had never seen before. The web-swinging element that I was talking about with The Amazing Spider-Man, this is the first time that we had ever seen it. The integration of CGI, while it doesn't hold up as much, I still think it looks good. We're talking the really early 2000s, and the web swinging is really cool. And the best thing about this movie, which carries over into the second one, is the theme. This gave us the definitive, in my opinion, Spider-Man theme song. We have not had one since that even comes close to it. You can argue me that all day, but this is the Spider-Man theme song, and I really like Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin, and of course, Harry Osborn. That relationship worked. A really good Aunt May, just really good characters in this movie. I just wanted this to be a little bit more. Going back and watching it today, it definitely feels of its time, but I kind of love the movie, and it kind of holds up for me probably more than it does other people. And going back and revisiting Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, while he seems way too old to be in high school, he's still good in the role. At number 3, the debate in my head rages on. I actually had this moving up on the list. I had this at number 2 earlier this morning, and then I just went back and said, you know what? I can't do it. This movie has been at number 2 for so long, why replace it now? So I'm keeping SpiderMan Homecoming at number 3, but that takes nothing away from it. These top 3 movies for me are fantastic, and I love Tom Holland as Spider-Man. We know him from the Avengers. We know him from the trailer for Spider-Man Far From Home that we haven't gotten yet. Sony, where is that? And I don't necessarily know what they're going to do with him in the future. There's a lot of rumors that he's going to go back to the Sony universe and they're going to focus on him with the Venom characters and Morbius that they have coming out with Jared Leto. But I really want to see him kind of stick with the MCU because of his relationship with characters like Iron Man and seeing him interact with people in Infinity War. He feels like an Avengers to me, and way down the line, I could even see him taking over, I'm talking like 10 years, as the leader of the Avengers. But right now, I like keeping him in his Spider-Man world, just slightly interacting with MCU characters every now and then. But this first movie did a great job of setting the tone of what his world is like. The comedic element, the John Hughes feel to it, a great villain in Michael Keaton as the Vulture. You know, some people came up to me and said, Austin, I really didn't like Michael Keaton as the Vulture because he was just too lame. He was too down to earth. That's what made me enjoy him. I think that element, that blue-collar nature of his character, gives him a different dimension, a different aspect that makes him likable. And then you have a villain that is menacing. When he finds out who Spider-Man is, spoilers, I guess you guys have seen it. That scene had me in the theaters like, oh my goodness, that was absolutely menacing, and everything about the aura of his character. I just can't wait to see him again. Can't wait to see Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. I think SpiderMan Homecoming was so good. It set the tone. It did everything it needed to do to launch this individual Spider-Man character, and that got me really excited. And that's why SpiderMan Homecoming is at number 3. Now, number 2 is Spider-Man 2. And that means there is a movie at number 1 that you guys are going to be like, what? But Spider-Man 2 is at number 2, and that's because Sam Raimi did everything he did in the first one. In my opinion, and some people aren't going to agree, I think he did it even better. He integrated all of these characters, the relationships, the build-up of a villain that is very close to the hero, and then he goes off and does his villain thing, and then at the end, he may have a change of heart, he may not. You know, once I think about it, all 3 of these movies are very similar, and they all involve Mary Jane Watson being kidnapped. Yeah. But I think that formula was fresh enough in just the second Spider-Man movie, and it really worked because Alfred Molina gave us a Doc Ock for the ages, a Doc Ock so good that he has not even been attempted to be replicated, and I don't think anyone is going to try to replicate him because it is one of my favorite villainous performances, one of my favorite villains of all time. He's such a likable guy. He is such a good performer. And then when he turns evil, you believe it, you see it, you are sad for him, you're emotional. And that scene where he's just ripping apart all the doctors and throwing them around, straight Sam Raimi, straight out of a horror film. It works so well. And then you have Tobey Maguire having a beautiful character arc. He really owns this role in the second movie. Complain about him as you will, and I do sometimes, especially in the third one. But in the second one, he does everything he needed to do. He does it right. And that scene where the car comes through that glass where he's sitting there talking to Mary Jane is still, in my opinion, one of the coolest scenes that I have ever seen in a live-action movie. Everything about it, from the music to the directing to the acting, Spider-Man 2 is still up there for me as one of the greats. A bit cheesy, going back and watching it, that's my one big complaint, but I still think the majority of it really holds up, and it's a movie that I grew up with. It defined my childhood. So, of course, I'm a bit biased. I'm going to have a little bit of nostalgia. Let me know if you guys agree with me in the comments. Yeah. And we have reached number 1. You are probably thinking, Austin, are you crazy? This isn't a live-action movie. This is an animated movie. How is this going to top your list? Well, I'm here to say I can't stop thinking about this film. It is so good. One of my favorite movies of the year because it got so much right. And as a fan of Spider-Man, look, if you're not a fan of this character, I don't know if you're going to love this movie as much as I love this movie. But Into the Spider-Verse brought every element of Peter Parker and Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy and Penny Parker and Spider-Man Noir. Oh my, are those characters really all in a movie together? That is incredible. But how is it going to manage all of those characters? How is it going to do it right? And I talked about this in depth in my review, so I don't want to go too far into it again, but this movie just did it right. It is fun, it is inventive, it's entertaining, the music is good. We get a look into a brand new Spider-Man in Miles Morales because he is the focus of this film. Even though we have great side characters and they have great backstories and they all get fleshed out as much as they need to individually, the focus is still on Miles Morales. And I said this in my review, I walked out of the theater with my friend who is a massive Peter Parker fan. He looked at me, and first of all, he said this movie was incredible. Second of all, he looked at me and said, Miles Morales is my new favorite Spider-Man. I feel like a lot of people are going to have that opinion walking out of this movie because it does such a great job of getting you to love this character. And yes, it's animation, but that should not deter you from going and seeing this movie, coming out loving this movie, because the animation is so beautiful. It is incredible. They mix hand-drawn animation with 3D animation, with like CGI elements, the way that it looks. You have to get used to it. It's kind of like the Lego movie, but once you're 5 minutes in and you're used to the animation style and how they slightly blur the background and how every character has their own individual look and feel, I'm talking about every Spider-Man character, I think you are going to wind up really loving this movie. I hope you do anyways, and even if you still have a lot of fun with it and you don't end up loving it, I absolutely think it's going to be a movie that is in people's top 3s, top 2s, and maybe even your favorite Spider-Man movie of all time. Now, you may ask me next week after rewatching all 3 of my top 3, and I might say, yep, nope, Homecoming's my favorite, or Spider-Man 2's my favorite, but right now, after non-stop thinking about Into the Spider-Verse, and I actually went back and rewatched, I'm pretty confident where I have that placed. I'm confident with Spider-Man 2. And as of right now, guys, Into the Spider-Verse, I gave it the highest score I've ever given a Spider-Man movie. I knew it should be at number 1. I just had to sit down, write out notes, and think about it. And right now, it's my number 1 favorite Spider-Man movie. So let me know, what do you guys think about all of the Spider-Man movies? Which one is your favorite? Which one is your least favorite? Sorry, I talked so long in this video. There's just so much stuff to talk about because this character is so incredible. Stan Lee, thank you so much for being a part of creating this character. And by the way, he gets a beautiful, beautiful tribute in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That's a good reason to go watch that movie. And then, of course, stay after the credits. You guys are the absolute best. Later on this week, I may do a spoiler review to Into the Spider-Verse. Let me know if you want that. And then I will be ranking the Transformers movies the closer we get to Bumblebee, because, of course, I watched that and reviewed it on my channel. And then this Saturday, Aquaman. I cannot wait to make all of these videos for you guys. You are the absolute best. Thank you for all that you guys do, and I'll catch you later.